Thank you for that. That was beautiful. Um, so first, I just want to tell you thank you so much for letting me be here. This has been a really hard time of our life for a while. I feel like for me, and so so the option to preach here this week has been a really important time for me to sit down and be able to stop and think and reflect. I feel like when I live healthily, I spend a lot of time academically studying farming, right? Because I'm a nerd. Um, okay, yeah. So, and I mean that as a totally good thing. Nerds are wonderful. So, and then at the same time, I'm a very active person and love to do things, right? But then at the same time, I'm also a very spiritual person and love to take time and stop and see things through different lenses. And for the past probably 5 months, it has only been production. It has been 5 in the morning until 10 at night, every single day, work, 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 from tree planting through spring planting, through and it just, and this week caused me to stop and slow down. And then I got here this morning, and everything here is so thoughtful. You realize that? That's not normal. I'm from the country. These things aren't thought about. The hymns have such beautiful words, and we haven't sung those words before. So thank you for exposing me to those. The children's time was really nice and thoughtful and included what was going on. And even just the time to sit and listen to piano has been such a blessing to me. So I've already been blessed by you guys, and thank you. So thanks for letting me be here. The other reason, I realize that whenever I'm just in straight up production mode, I don't respond well to other people. And I had this opportunity this week that made me stop and realize, oh my gosh, I think we're like kinship here, or like we're kin here. You guys are called That Church, right? And Michael was telling me about this week, and I was asking him the story of why you're called That Church, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm that farmer. Like, I know that's what all our neighbors think, right? Because we are surrounded by seas of corn and soy, and there's really tall, clean, perfectly manicured cornfields that are chemically controlled to keep it all just a big monoculture, right? And then there's these perfectly manicured soybeans, and they look so beautiful, don't they? But the cost of that comes from chemically manicured fields, right? And people drive by my farm, and there's always something different. There's sheep running around, and there's trees popping up. And we were telling people for a while we had green burial because we have like 1,000 trees we planted, and there's these plastic tubes. People are like, what are you guys doing out there? And so I'm like, I think we're the same. And so I want to offer you guys a parable today. I want to offer you the parable of the thistle, and it's come from some really hard learning. But first, I want to show you a little bit about my farm, okay? So if you could go to the next slide here. So this is kind of who we are a little bit. You see me and Lauren, she's over here. You see my sister. We started off and we farmed sheep together. COVID was great for me, just for me personally, because she used to be a teacher, and she had her school shut down. She came out. We learned to build fence together because we got sheep. And she decided she liked to build fence so much that she became a farmer with me. So now it's myself and my sister on this farm. My brother-in-law, he farms pigs right now on our farm. And we have a tree planting business called Stacked Agroforestry, in which we spent a lot of time planting trees this spring. And a lot of it comes from the blessing of this old man right here. His name was Charlie Payne. He bought land in the 50s in Concordia, Missouri, which is where we farm, and conventional as can be. Best farmer in the county, had the best soil in the county, right? And I say blessing, but that came with curses too, right? And that's a story that we don't have anywhere near enough time to unpack. We could talk about that for a year probably. But this is my grandpa, and the first time we did something different on our farm, we did something called a cover crop, where in between corn and soy, we planted cereal rye. And so anyway, this is my grandpa. But if you drive by to our farm, the reason people will say, go to the next slide, that we are that farm is because we used to be a normal farm. This is what our farm used to look like all winter. It was just one clean tilled field. There was corn and there was soy, and we used herbicides and we used fertilizers and all that stuff. We did that for 50 years. Okay, I did that for the first 5 years, and then I went through a theological kind of revolution, started with N.T. Wright and led me to a lot of other places. But we got into cover crops, regenerative agriculture, And now our farm looks like this. That's a map. That's not what it actually looks like. But so the blue areas, this is a couple years ago, they have a bunch of chestnut trees that we harvest, and we plant chestnut trees. All these fences are so we can do rotational grazing, which means that we can graze our sheep without any deworming. We don't have to chemically treat them at all. We have warm season grasses. We have windbreaks. We have pollinator habitats. All kinds of different things that make us that farmer. If you go to the next slide, please. A lot of times you'll drive by and our farm will look like this. We'll have corn and soy and sunflowers and cowpeas all just kind of growing up in there, and you see some trees in the background, and we rotationally graze our sheep through this in the best possible forage that they can get. If you go to the next slide, we also are trying to do something that mimics our native biome. Okay, we'll talk about this later. But in the history before we came here, right, our area would have been oak savanna, and that would have been some trees and some grasses, some warm season grasses, some cool season grasses, and then buffalo and antelope would have all just been like roaming through this area. So we've tried to set up this in a way that we can replace corn with chestnuts. Chestnuts can be like used in the same way that corn is. We also have hazelnuts. They haven't grown yet. One of these years, girls, we'll get those hazelnuts to produce hazels. But then we figured out ways that we can graze in between them. And to do this so that we can actually, what we're finding with our stacked agroforestry thing is that we can go into a normal pasture for anybody, and we can get trees established with almost no work, which makes that very, very scalable. So you can do a 20-acre pasture or a 100-acre pasture, and you can have trees inside of that, and you can do that with almost no work. And that means that it's very scalable. So go to the next slide, please. So you see chestnut harvest. We have a lot of mulberry, a lot of native trees. We love to go around and pick trees. We call this drive-by mulberrying. You also notice purple flowers in the background. That's what we're going to talk to today. If any of you are like old farmers randomly in here, like, what is this? Oh, you are. And you're like, oh, these. And what did they tell you about thistles? Yeah, or a machete, and you got to go out there with a sack and cut the heads off, right? Yeah, because they're the devil plant. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. Don't beat me there. Okay. So go to the next slide, please. You also might see us trying to have fun sometimes. Our kids like sports. We like to bottle feed lambs, and sometimes we don't like to bottle feed lambs as long as the attention span of our stuff goes. And we make our kids work all the time. That's me and Ella over here wrapping wires around these so we can protect trees from pigs. So we're going to stop there for just 1 second. So what I've realized is more and more, I think that Jesus in every culture at every time would have been that whatever, that church, that farmer. And I think it might be more concerning if a church wasn't that church, right? I wish more churches in my area were that church for a myriad of different reasons. So I just want to thank you, right? Thank you for walking a hard path, and thanks for letting me be here. But I'm here today because of another That Church path. You guys have a banner right out there. It's called a Creation Justice, right? And so I want to provide a challenge and a different perspective on a Christian response to environmentalism today. And Michael asked me if I would do this, and I was like, I can't do this in 1 week. I can't do this in 1 year, really. So he's going to let me come back in a couple weeks. So this week, we're going to focus on ecology. And in a couple weeks, we're going to focus on economy and really look at a lot of like practical things that we as church and city and country people can all do, right? But I think it's so critical of Christian voices heard in this area because we have a powerful story. I was walking Raina through the whole story. Creation, fall, Israel, Jesus, church, new creation, right? All the way through the story of the Bible. And we have this powerful Christian story that can be told. It's a wonderful voice in this arena that reminds us we came from dust and that we'll return to dust. That we are, as Richard Rohr likes to say, we are human beings, part of the earth. We're not separate from it, but that's just not often the case in our Christian environment, right? And so I'm so lucky today. I don't have to make that case. In my context, in rural America, I have to make that case. But here I get to skip that because you guys already agree with me, right? So, yes, all right, very good. So first of all, I want to narrow the scope because when we talk about a Christian environmental response, there's so many ways that we can go, right? And they're all worthy. We could talk about preserving nature, like stopping urban and suburban sprawl, right? So that we can protect current natural native biomes. You go to Kansas, it's native tall grass prairie. You go to the Amazon, it's rainforest, so on and so forth. And that's a worthy cause. We could also talk about green tech. We could talk about solar panels and batteries or cold fusion. So many awesome things there, right? Or we could talk about human consumption patterns, the reduce, reuse, recycle thing, right? Or here's my favorite. I read this book, if you want a great, so can you guys tell I had ADHD? This great book by a guy named David Montgomery, okay? David Montgomery, he wrote a book called Dirt. It's called The Erosion of Civilization. And he tracks every civilization and their fall from the beginning of it all the way to the end. And he says the main driver is agricultural use of land, okay? There's a couple exceptions. One is Egypt, okay? And it's all based upon erosion. So one is Egypt because Ethiopia washed away and died so that Egypt could maintain its farming. The only one that really made it long-term was China. And do you know why China made it 2,000 years? My wife does, and she's going, oh, no. Do you know what they did? They took the poop from the households in the city, and they put it in wheelbarrows, and they carried it back out to the farms where it came from, right? That's what they did. It was the human manure. That's how because I mean, when you eat food, it comes from the country, right? It gets shipped to the city, but you know what doesn't come back? The fertilizer, right? And so, man, it'd be so cool if somebody can figure this out. I figured it out. But my family doesn't want to have composting toilets, do you, Lauren? I got them in on the bidet. They're good for that. But the composting toilets, they're just not going to pull that off, okay? So we could talk about those things, right? But we all have a sphere of influence. And the sphere that I love to recommend churches focus on is agriculture. Why? Because we all eat, right? Our consumption patterns drive a good part of the economy of agriculture and then therefore the land practices that come from that. And it touches on all aspects of our life, whether you know it or not. Your taxes fund subsidies that maintain status quo. That's a couple weeks from now, right? And I'm going to get into that because I used to be a part of the corn lobby when I was a corn farmer, okay? The SNAP program is run through the USDA and included in the Farm Bill. It's one of the few bipartisan issues in Congress. I got to be in D.C., and I got to talk to Kamala and Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and all of the really far-right conservatives. Everybody supports the Farm Bill. Okay? Everybody does, okay? And it's a big sphere of influence. 53% of U.S. land is used for agriculture. Over half of land is used to grow food. And 10% of all carbon emissions come from agriculture. When you add the extra 2% that comes from fertilizer production and the shipping of it, because it's made in Florida and it's shipped up here, right? Okay? That makes it third. So the third leading cause of carbon emissions in the United States today is agriculture. It's behind power production and transport. Okay? And it's the leading water quality polluter in the U.S. Don't tell the farming people I told you that. And it leaves us with 75% of our non-organic food that have pesticides in it. Don't invite me to a party. I will ruin beer for you. And so this week and a week from now, I want to offer some thoughts about this. But here's the problem. What do we do? And the answer is it's really complex. Okay? Go to the next slide. If you come to our farm, you often see this. Okay? This is a really nice looking garden. It's a no-dig-ish garden. Okay? That's organic, right? We also have these pigs that are roaming around in the field. And like one of the big questions that we run into in farming is that we have to restart ecological succession. Okay, if I'm going to grow this right over here, if I'm going to grow corn or soy or vegetables, I have to restart ecological succession. You just have to, because an annual can't really grow well in a perennial. So to grow vegetables or proteins, like plant-based proteins for the most part, you have to do tillage or you have to use herbicide. And if you ask people which is worse, nobody really knows because tillage releases a whole bunch of carbon from the soil into the ground. It's the leading cause of carbon emissions in agriculture. And then herbicides, if you're going to use that to restart succession, you know what that is? You end up with a bunch of chemicals on your food and in your food system. Okay? So which is worse? And you ask one person, one well-known scientist and another well-known scientist, they have an argument about it, and nobody really knows because it's complex. Go to the next one. So our answer that we like, right, is we like to mimic our natural environment. But we realize in the middle of this, so like we have grasses with trees that are going to produce food crops that can replace corn. Okay, it's a cool system, right? It's neat. We're planting these trees, and you know what happens? We're putting them in a bunch of plastic. There's so much plastic, and it's in wrapping. But that's the only way that we can figure out how to both graze and still make money and still make a livelihood and still get trees to grow up in the situation. So, our answer is not perfect. It's complex. It's hard, right? Go to the next one. So one of my favorite things to do with my sheep is graze our yard. I love to mow our yard, okay? But we can't always mow our yard with our sheep. You know why? Because if they're in the same area for more than 3 days, and if you bring them back before 30 days, they'll get parasites. They'll get wormy, and then I have to treat them with a dewormer. So, but then by the time it gets 30 days, now it's this tall, right? So I can't leave my sheep in, or I've got to use dewormer, and even worse, they poop in the yard, and my kids can't play in it. Or I think they can, but I don't. So we have an ongoing fight about grazing the yard, right? So, so everything that we do is complex and multifaceted, and all of our answers operate much less in black and white and much more in shades of gray. And so I want to tell a parable for the day to help you as you go through your creation justice. I hope that it can help inform and create conversations and not give answers, because you're working on a lot of cool stuff and have a lot of good answers already, right? But it's based upon my experience, and honestly, I think it's paradigmatic of a worthy ecological pursuit. Can you go to the next one? So it's the parable of the really pretty thistle plant, okay? In our text today, it says the kingdom of heaven is like a man who scatters seed on the ground. You know what's the problem with that? Not many people do that anymore. If we're planting fields, we plant them. We put the seeds in the ground so we can maximize seed-to-soil contact so they can grow well, right? And if they do, they scatter a lot of it. But the point of this parable still remains. The seed sprouts on its own, and it grows on its own. And the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed? What's a mustard seed? Are they around here? Do we have mustard bushes? We don't. I don't think Jesus would tell us these now. And so today I'm going to take some license. I'm going to tell a new parable. See, I think the kingdom of God is a farmer who's learning to control the thistle. And I think it's so important for us to understand, for those of us who are trying to bring the kingdom of God into the realm of caring for the earth. But to get there, I've got to tell my story of interacting with the thistle. 15 years ago, I was a beginning farmer. I farmed with my grandpa. My grandpa was 85 at the time, 80 at the time. I was, how old was I? 25. I was 25. And so, and the middle generation, my dad and my aunt, they had all died, so it was just me and this old man, okay? And we would go out every single summer, and he would have his tractor with a 200-gallon tank of water and Roundup in it, and he'd give me this big, long hose, and we'd walk through every waterway. Sorry, I'm getting outside of we'd walk through every waterway, and he'd drive the tractor, and I'd walk along, and I'd spray here, and I'd spray here, and I'd spray here, and we would go, and we would kill every one of those thistles in every waterway, right? And it only took 2 days, but it was 2 days of torture. We're walking through waist-high grass, and the worst, I didn't get it. I'm like, why does this matter? Why am I killing these thistles that aren't growing in my field? Okay, they're not taking away nutrients from our crops, right? And then, fast forward 10 years later, our big switch. We switched from corn to soy because I found out, ironically, that I was allergic to herbicide. Okay? I say, yeah, it's great. Because every time I was around it, I would get home and like that evening, my throat would swell shut. No idea. Thought it was food, thought it was other things. Turns out we talked to a doctor, it's herbicide. I say that in Kansas City, people are like, well, of course, everybody's allergic to herbicide. I say that in the country, and it's like, ooh, you're that farmer. So we switched to sheep, and our whole farm became a pasture, okay? And so the first year was great. Then we brought in hay, and the next year I had a few thistles, and you would never guess the words that came out of my grandpa's mouth when he saw those first thistles. We're driving around on the side-by-side looking at the sheep and looking at the thistles, and yeah, all those words, right? Because he was angry. He'd eradicated the thistle, and now I brought him back on the farm. Luckily, this is the fun part, I had some good friends of the regenerative agriculture movement, and they told me an interesting fact, okay? Thistles form, I get nerdy. Did I tell you that? Thistles form a symbiotic relationship with an anaerobic bacteria. Basically, they like to be in compacted soils. That's where they're healthy. But the cool thing about a thistle is it has a taproot and it breaks up compaction. And so you know what happens as they grow? They break up compaction. They lose the anaerobic nature of the soil. Oxygen gets in the soil, and they lose their ability to compete. Cool. They compete themselves out of a job, right? So, and what's cool is they're even an indicator. They show you have compaction or a calcium deficiency. And so their advice was just wait them out. They'll be gone. What's your thought on that? Is that going to work? So, yeah, right, exactly. I have kids. I have kids and knives. So I should be able to take care of this problem, right? Their advice was wait them out. And so I did. And we move our sheep daily. And I got to see every acre of our farm so much more often than when I was a corn and soy farmer. And every day I got to observe the thistle. It starts off low and has these spiky beginnings, and then it comes up and shoots up, and eventually it gets up above the grass, and you have these purple flowers that pop up. And I noticed something amazing. There's this bright purple flower that you see up there. It is a great pollinator. The honeybees love the thistle of all kinds, the native thistles, Canadian thistles, musk thistles, native wasp, everything loves the thistle. There's always bees buzzing and native wasps floating around the flower. And so for all the problems that bee has, and so many are caused by my previous approach of farming, especially insecticides at the time of planting, I learned to love the thistle. It told me my soil problems. It provided life to birds and bees. I was like, why is the thistle a problem? Excuse me. And then the years went by. Hold on. The years went by, and I noticed something. The thistles didn't come back right where they were, just like my friends told me. But you know what they did? They came back next to them and over here and over here. Because remember, who gave those seeds out earlier? Okay, you gave those seeds? Okay, so those, like, squash seeds, is that what they were? Zucchini seeds? Yeah, they're big, right? Thistle seeds are small, and they're carried on the wind, and there's a bunch of them, right? And they came up everywhere except for right where they were. And so this summer, if you drive by our road, I was that farmer, and that was not a good thing, right? Because my entire pasture was full of thistles. And then I realized that's a problem because the sheep eat every other weed. That's what I love about sheep. They eat every weed, don't need herbicides, except for thistles. So what continues to grow and reproduce and get bigger? Thistles and thistles and thistles. And then I learned something new that I didn't know. Do you know that if you have thistles in Lafayette County, you get a letter from the Department of Conservation, which tells you that if you don't control your thistles, you will get fined, okay? It also means something interesting. One of my neighbors turned me in. Because, oh, thank you. It's amazing. It's not asking ye shall receive. It's cough. Is it cough and ye shall receive? Is that how this works? Thank you so much, by the way. Now, what am I going to do with that? It can go there. So it turns out the letter says thistles are an invasive species. 2 of them are in Missouri pastures. Johnson grass, which ironically is a really good forage, and thistles. That says we have to control them or we get fined. And so we're sent a list of approved controls. And you know what they are? Every one of them is a herbicide. Every single one. We have an entire page, probably 15 options, 15 different herbicides. I'm like, I can't use any of these. If I use any of these, I could die. Like that's how herbicides cause an anaphylactic reaction in my throat that swells my throat shut. If I see somebody spraying, I have to go inside. Okay? I really wanted to. I wanted to send a letter back and say I was growing them as a crop for thistle tea, which is used in detoxifying programs. Lauren had some. But I didn't do it. I controlled myself. But what it did was it made us question. My grandpa hated them. And it's taken over our forage, and we're going to get fined. So we step back and ask, should we actually use herbicide? Should we get somebody else to do this? Or can we use an organic herbicide? We've heard some of them might work. So we went back to the research board, went back to the Google, and we found something interesting. We found some weevils that are specific to Canadian thistles that get into the flower. So the thistle still grows. It still breaks up compaction, still tells us where we have compaction, and it gets into the flower, and it prevents them from seeding out. So they grow up, they do their thing, they flower, they allow things to pollinate, but then they disrupt the reproductive cycle, and they keep them from spreading seed. And what's interesting about that is, of course, the natural way. See, thistles don't dominate prairies or undisturbed woodlands, right? But there are always some. And the insect community is always intact. And because they haven't sprayed to kill all the insecticides, and insecticides don't discriminate, right? And diverse plants provide diverse insects. And so large-scale agriculture, whether it's organic or conventional, tries to eliminate pests, and it takes decades to repopulate them naturally, right? And so we found this interesting middle way in which we didn't use herbicide, but we can keep them from spreading, but we still get the benefits of the thistle, but we offer control, and we're not a pest to our neighbors. But it's slow. It's going to take a couple of years. And we always have to maintain a certain level of thistles. So what do we do with, why are you talking about thistles? Like, what's the point, Josh? What are you getting at? But I think it's so important for us Christians if we're hoping to make an ecological impact in the ag sector. First of all, it's so important that we don't demonize the other side. My grandpa demonized thistles and then never learned to work with them or see their beauty, right? And I think happens so often as we talk about food. We demonize the other side. The organic people demonize the conventional people. The vegetarians, they demonize the meat eaters, right? And there are good reasons to be vegetarian. There are good reasons to eat less meat. There are good reasons to thoughtfully raise meat as well. There are probably, not for me, but there are good reasons to use chemicals, and there's good reasons not to. And there's smart, well-meaning people on both sides of these ecological issues, and the thistle reminds us that often both can kind of be at least true, right? And so we, as Christians, need to bring a voice that approaches these polarizing issues with humility and grace. Second, I think the thistle teaches us that we should always search for the middle way in the food landscape. And what I've learned about this is there's always a slower way, and it's always a less convenient way, and it's always a more messy way. And it honestly, like the middle way usually looks a lot like something you can cook at home and you can invite your neighbors to come and partake of. It often looks a lot like nature. We're really striving for our biome to come back into place here, right? The oak savanna, mixed warm season and cool season grasses interspersed with trees and bushes with large animals roaming through the entire area controlling vegetation and then not returning until the grass is ready to eat, right? So if we can find systems and we can buy food from people who do that, there's great people doing work in this whole area around that, right? Okay, and we can purchase foods from people whose farms look like that. And here's another interesting one. Like, I love the idea of something that I call a limited ecocide. If you go back to that picture of the garden, you know what had to be done to grow those vegetables? You had to commit ecocide. You had to restart succession. It had to be killed and wiped clean so you could grow vegetables. If we can selectively choose small parts of our farms and then develop native stuff around it, that could be a pretty cool way to do that. And then honestly, for here, build your lawns and landscapes to look like something that should be here in this area, but that produce food. Maybe, your yard out here, I drove up, you know what it kind of looks like? It kind of looks like an oak savanna. You got these big, tall trees, and you got small grass underneath that, right? Some fun things that you could do with that. If you're familiar with permaculture guilds, it basically says there's a tree and a shrub and a ground cover, and you can do this with like food-producing stuff, and it's largely self-maintaining. And so you could take this and turn it into something really cool with permaculture guilds, okay? You can look that up later, okay? You could throw some laying hens in there, and you could give those hens away to the community. I don't know if they're illegal in Raytown, but you could be that church and show your neighbors both what it used to be like here and how abundant it could be here for them and the community. I've got a really good friend, Mark Bulig in North Kansas City. They have turned a lot of their church, he's a pastor up there, a lot of their church just into a community garden, and they give food away to all of their neighbors. It would be a very worthy pursuit, especially if it looked like this, right? And then maybe the most important, and this is really, I think, the more I think about farming, this is it. You as a church, we as Christians need to find meaningful long-term partnerships with people who are doing the work of food production. See, my breakthrough with the Thistle, it took a decade, 10 years of eyes on the land. And truly good ecological solutions always come from long, slow experience. And they come through mistakes and changes in what you think is right and wrong. So it would be great if you could find a way to partner long-term with thoughtful farmers who share your worldview and get on their farms. Go there, spend time there, meditate there, take your musicians there and play music there, volunteer to help there, do yoga there, learn to love a piece of land that produces food, and you will learn to live this complexity. One of my favorite ideas is the idea of the hinterlands in the Old Testament. Jerusalem was the city that everything went up to. Everything surrounded it. The farmers on the outside supported the city of Jerusalem, and the city of Jerusalem supported the farmers. It would be a beautiful model if we could return to the hinterlands idea here in Kansas City. I've always wondered if a church and a farm could team up and provide meaningful employment and healthy food and a common experience. Which brings me to a brief preview, because I don't want to offer any practical things quite yet. In 2 weeks, I'm going to come back and talk about the economics of agriculture, because there are systems in place that make the status quo of farming incredibly hard to change. Basically, a corn farmer is guaranteed a profit because your tax dollars subsidize that. Why would you leave a business in which you were guaranteed a profit? And then I want to promote a way through, a worldview that promotes a worldview that something I talk about is called eyes per acre. So if we can buy food and think about systems in terms of eyes per acre, I think it'll be a way through. It's based on a warning prophecy in Isaiah 5. If you get a chance, read the first few verses of Isaiah 5. And then we can really get practical about what a church can do to promote ecological change, not just in a yard or on one farm, but in the ag sector altogether. But really, it all starts with the parable of the thistle. See, the kingdom of God is like a community of people figuring out what to do about a thistle. They love the land, and they love the community, so they try different approaches. They follow the advice of their elders, but that doesn't work because the thistle still dominates. They live, they watch, they listen to the land and learn to see the beauty in all the facets of the thistle, but this too isn't enough. Eventually, with time and humility and grace, they find a way through. And the kingdom of God is very near indeed. Amen.